Paul VandeGraaf, can you explain to us, there's a new way of doing press releases, or not a new way, there's an update to the press release procedure?
Yeah, absolutely. Recently, yesterday we did a press release, and we're going to do an updated press release because there's been a few questions asked just for some clarity around kind of where this comes from. But clearly, across the province of Ontario, we always look to mirror best practices. And what we have with this media procedure is nothing more than what we've seen other services, both locally and across the province, do. The issuing of, or the releasing of names for people accused in all circumstances is not a consistent practice across the province of Ontario. We have been releasing most names for the last few years, and it's come to our light, both provincially and locally, that there is a bit of an unintended consequence, and that's the stigmatization that we find some people find themselves in. So we are completely within our lawful right to release names. That's completely allowed by law. So there is some misinformation out there that the reason we're doing this is because we're afraid of being sued. No, we're not. That's not what it is. Really what we're doing is, in concert with best practices from the OACP and the Provincial Media Relations Officers Network, and from our most recent community consultation, we heard loud and clear from our community partners that our communication was very enforcement-centric. We heard that it was very antagonistic. So we just started to review what it was that we could do differently. So the information that we are not releasing is a person's name for minor offenses. We are still going to release information where it's a major event, where there's like a serial break and enters or a serious criminal event or natures to that. We're still going to release those people's names. What we're not going to release is some of the, I guess what's being said socially is some of the constant repeat breach of undertakings, breach of probation orders. And I understand this is a balance between the community's, I'm going to say, want to know and our need to release. And that's the balancing act as chief I find myself in. And quite frankly, I feel that it's a position where we need to recognize that we're further stigmatizing and harming people, and which may interfere with their ability to grow through whatever circumstance they presently are finding themselves in. And then I rest on, what is it of the community value to know that, quote unquote, Paul VandeGraaf was arrested for a breach of probation? Is there great community value in that? I don't know the why to that answer. So those are the cases where we're still going to release what occurred, so the community will still know that we're arresting so many people for breaches of probation or breaches of undertaking. We're still going to release that a person from Cobourg or a person from Grafton was arrested and is going to be going over to a court date on a certain date. And at the end of the day, that information is available to the public if they're very interested in it. I was talking to somebody else who was maybe as old as I was, or am, and they remembered the time where there was a court beat and a police beat in journalism. And in those venues, that information would be released from the media's perspective, from someone covering the court beat. And everything changes, and so does time. So at this point, we really feel that this is a fair approach to addressing both the community's need to know what's happening in our community and also the need to protect and prevent further stigmatization of people in our community. And that's the balancing act. And I recognize not every decision we make is going to make everybody happy, but I really truly feel that we are addressing the better common good. And I'm happy to stand on this decision to say that we are going to keep trends in front of our community. We're going to let the community know what's happening. We're going to let them know when it's happening. And when it's time to identify a person for a serious criminal offense or a serial criminal event in our community, then I'm going to continue to do that.
If I can ask, minor to major, like you say, it could be totally different in what aspects it brings up. But I mean, say an impaired driver, would you release the name or no?
We don't typically release everybody's name in all offenses, so I'm probably not going to release an impaired driver's information. However, that being said, if it's a police officer or a public figure, is that all of a sudden more newsworthy? And that was a question I was asked at the Police Services Board meeting this morning. And the answer is, you're absolutely right, because if it's a police officer, we're held to a higher standard. So our procedure locally is very clear, it's very defined. These decisions aren't being made in isolation. They're not being made solely by me, and there's no, I'm about transparency. So if anyone were to allege that this is an effort of Chief VandeGraaf and Cobourg Police Service to reduce transparency, I would vehemently argue with that. I'm completely transparent. My phone number is known to everybody. I'm accessible to the media at all times. I'm willing to be challenged openly about anything that a community member feels is important to them. In this particular issue, I think the common good and the better good in this one is to recognize that some of our people in our community are suffering, and if we're furthering that suffering by releasing their name, then we can do something to affect change.
I might be wrong with this, but I'll say this as an example. To me, a repeat offender for impaired driving would be something that's worthy of releasing. In other words, if as I say, and it said in the release that you or your designate would be the one to decide that.
Yeah.
So again, like, all things could change, can change, depending on the circumstances.
So that's a really good point. I take impaired driving very seriously, as I do many offenses. If I had a repeat habitual impaired driver in our community, we're probably going to release that name. Because what's the story? The story is a person has been arrested for the 4th time for impaired driving. The story isn't John Smith, and sorry to any John Smith out there, is arrested. No, the story is that we have a problem with impaired driving. It's the same. Is it important to indicate that somebody was arrested for breaking into a shed and stealing a 3-speed bike? That's not a story. If we had 30 sheds broken into overnight and we were able to arrest 4 people, I'm more apt to release that name, because we're addressing a serial event in our community that affects more people. So the answer is to why are we releasing that name? Because it's a full disclosure of a community issue. Instead of releasing somebody for, and I'm not saying that breach of undertakings are less important, but in all seriousness, what advantages, and again, you and I have had this conversation, more times than not I have to explain what that means to the community versus what a true event that is. So this is no perfect science. We are following suit with what other police services in the province have already done. Peterborough did the exact same decision about 3-4 weeks ago. I really feel it's a fair change or amendment to an existing policy given our times.